everybody. I am really happy to see people. I am Michael Munson with Forge, and we are here today with Shelley Gregory, also with Forge, and we're going to talk today about the ins and outs of Wisconsin name and gender change. So it's a subject that a lot of us are very interested in, and I know some folks that are probably here have specific questions, and we will hope to get to all of those questions during our hour. And if we don't, we will follow up with folks and pursue those questions later. So just a couple of back-end pieces. We do have an ASL interpreter, and if you would like to pin their window, you can go up to those little three dots next to Sarah's picture and drop it to pin it so that you can always see them in the screen. The other background kind of piece of data is that this is a project in partnership with the Frederick and Medical College of Wisconsin's Inclusion Health Clinic. And it was a really kind of neat opportunity that we had to get some funding for COVID-related kind of programming and services, but it allows us to do a lot of things that are helpful to our trans community. So that funding is through the Advancing a Healthier Wisconsin Endowment at the Medical College of Wisconsin. So we are recording today, so if that changes how you want to interact with questions, just know that we're recording. We can try to not say your name if that is important to you when we respond to a question. And any other parameters around your safety and security we want to really respect. So for folks that are not familiar with Zoom, the couple of ways that you can interact today are either through raising your hand. So there's a little virtual raise hand button. Can folks find that, and can we practice doing that? Oh, people are really quick. Way to go. It looks like almost all of you have figured that out. It's great. It's kind of like a weird little feature, but it's helpful. And the other ways that you can interact with folks are through the chat box. So can you find the chat box? And how about typing in your favorite name? It doesn't have to be your name, but your favorite name. Well, people have a favorite name. Shelley's going, whatever. Cool. See, those are some interesting names. Zion is an interesting name. Some of us don't have an answer to that question. So if you can't figure it out, at least type an X in the chat box so that, we know that you can figure your way to the chat box. And if you can't find the chat box, it should be along the bottom of your screen. If you're using a phone, it might be off the top, little three buttons. Hopefully folks can find it. Okay. If folks still have a challenge with it, we will try to work it out as we move forward. I just wanted to remind folks too that we have masks available. So for folks that are venturing out in the world, if anybody needs a cloth mask, we'd be happy to send you one. So feel free to let us know in the chat box and we will take care of that for you. So let us get rolling. So Shelley Gregory is going to be our primary presenter and question and answerer today. And I think the three of us are going to stay on the screen and respond to your questions as well. So Shelley, can you introduce yourself more fully and get us going?
Great. Yes. Thank you, Michael. And thank you also to Sarah, our ASL interpreter, for being here with us today. I assume that you all can hear me okay? All right. Yes, so as Michael said, my name is Shelley Gregory. I use they, them pronouns. I'm also okay with any other pronoun. I am the strategic project coordinator for Forge. What that mostly means in reality is that I work for Forge. I work here in Wisconsin primarily, in southeastern Wisconsin and in Milwaukee. And I'm our primary advocate who provides direct support to trans and non-binary and other folks in Milwaukee and southeastern Wisconsin. And part of the supports that we often provide to people are assistance with name and gender marker changes and there are lots and lots and lots of ways and places that we use our name and that our gender marker is recorded. And there are lots and lots of changes to all of those records that we can make, obviously. What we'd like to do today is have a conversation, mostly a general conversation, where we talk about, some of the considerations in doing name and gender marker changes. I want to highlight resources that are available to all of you so that you can, come back and refer to information after today's session, that we leave you with some written resources to help you in figuring out what you want to do and figuring out how to do it. And so what that means is that, we may or may not be able to address very, very specific kind of nitty gritty details or questions about name and gender marker change processes today. But as always, I will emphasize probably more than once, and Michael is smiling because he knows what I'm going to say, which is that please, please, please reach out to us. You can reach us in lots of different ways, and you can contact me directly for one-on-one assistance, and we can do that in writing, via email or Facebook, or you can contact me directly, and Caleb has kindly just put a bunch of our contact information, as did Michael, in the chat box, and we'll repeat that a few times. So that's our agenda for today, primarily. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the things we think about in doing name and gender changes. I'd like to share with you lots of really good Wisconsin-based resources, both from Forge and from some other organizations that we work with. We'll talk about things like how do we afford these processes, and where we can get help with them. And then we'll talk about some of the more common kinds of name and gender marker changes that people tend to do. And that may not answer everybody's questions or cover everything that's relevant to everybody here today, but again, that's where we can follow up individually afterwards. And so I think we'll get going. And I do really want to echo Michael's invitation for you all to ask questions. We'd really like this session to be relevant to you and to, whatever kind of questions or things, that you're wondering, that you've been wondering about. If there's something you can't figure out, please feel free to put those questions in the chat box. And Michael will be monitoring the chat box. It's a little hard for me to do that while I'm speaking, so I may not address your question as soon as it pops into the chat box, but Michael will make sure that we either get through those during the session, or we can follow up with folks individually afterwards as well. All right. So again, really want to invite your questions, and I also want to invite your comments. I know many of you who are participating in the call today, and I know that some of you have gone through these processes recently, and so I'm not the only. I don't know that I'm an expert, but if I am, I'm not the only one in the room. You all have expertise as well, so please feel free to share that. So everything that we're going to talk about today is going to be primarily Wisconsin-based. We will talk about government IDs, government agencies in Wisconsin, and we will also talk about changes to federally issued IDs, as well as some other name and gender marker changes we need to think about that are not necessarily government issued IDs, and those can be things like health insurance or the information that our medical providers have on file for us. Even though we're talking primarily about Wisconsin, there certainly will be information that'll be relevant to folks who may be outside of Wisconsin. If we have folks who are looking for information specific to other states, that's something that I can certainly help with and help find information for after the session today, one-on-one. So, the first thing I'd really like to do is just acknowledge that, there's a lot of conversation in our communities about name and gender marker changes and how to do them. And, for a lot of people, it's a process that can seem kind of daunting, kind of intimidating. Sometimes we're talking about legal processes. Sometimes we're talking about using court procedures. And those are things that can be kind of a turnoff to some of us right off the bat. And so I just want to acknowledge that that is there, that some of these are processes that either are or can seem kind of complex to each of us in different ways. And part of what we want to do today is demystify a little bit of that process. And the other thing I want to say is, you may not remember everything that we talk about today, and I expect that you won't remember everything that we talk about today, and that's part of the reason we want to emphasize the resources that are available. I also want to recognize that there are a lot of potential barriers for us as individuals to making name and gender marker changes. And I probably should step back a minute and first say, not everybody wants to change their name or their gender marker. Shelley is my legal name. It's, a name that's sometimes considered androgynous. It's sometimes considered a little more maybe feminine or female identified. That doesn't really jive with my gender identity, but I've chosen for my own personal reasons not to change my name legally. So some folks may not want to do that. Some folks may want to change their name in certain circumstances and not others. And maybe that's a question of, where have we disclosed our gender identity? How do we identify in various contexts? So there's lots of individual considerations involved here. Some other potential barriers that we know are out there are things like cost. There are some costs to changing our name and gender marker on our government IDs. We also know that there are legal requirements and that there are medical requirements that are imposed legally on changing our name, well, primarily on changing our gender marker. And that sometimes can be a really big barrier for folks. There are larger conversations to be had in our community about changing some of these laws. And those are things that Forge works on as well, and works on with our partners around the state. But we need to acknowledge that these issues are out there. And we'll talk about how we can deal with some of those. The other consideration I know that lots of people have is privacy, particularly around going into court and getting a court-ordered name change. There are some privacy protections that are available, and we'll talk about those a little bit later when we talk about what the court process looks like. So what I'd like to do first is really re-emphasize the resources that are available to everyone out there. Forge and I are available for one-on-one assistance. There is also lots of written materials that are available that are really good. Some of them are pretty new and that are specific to Wisconsin. This past summer, Forge published the first kind of online version of a document called Trans in Wisconsin. And this is a reference guide that has all kinds of materials, and can serve as a resource for folks on a number of issues, from even thinking about how to come out or disclose gender identity, all the way through legal considerations like discrimination protections. And so we've got a whole chapter in there called identity documents. So that's chapter 6. We've just put the link in the chat box, and I'll really encourage you all to take a look at that either during or after the session today. Another really great source of information out there is, oh, how interesting. Sorry, everyone, my notes are a little bit out of order. So there we are. Another great source of information is Trans Law Help Wisconsin, and that's a place that a lot of you may already be familiar with. They're in Madison, and they have just very recently, in the last couple of months, published a brand new guide that's very similar to the Forge materials, and so I'd also encourage you to check that out, and that's in the chat box as well. One other great written resource and guide I'll recommend and mention is one that you may be familiar with already as well, and that's the NCTE, or National Center for Transgender Equality's, what they call their ID Document Center. I really like this website because you just go there and you say, hey, I live in Wisconsin, and their website shoots out all the information about how to do name changes in Wisconsin. Now, some other resources that are available, both locally in Wisconsin and nationally, are financial resources and legal resources. Trans Law Help is, I want to emphasize again, in Madison. Not only do they have the written materials on their website, but they can provide one-on-one assistance, and they can go to court with folks. They do clinics, so they'll have big group events where everybody can come in and work together on filling out forms and getting all of that good stuff ready. They also are able to provide some limited financial assistance, and you can find all of that information on their website. Another great project that helps with name changes is the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund. We call it TILDIF sometimes. They have a name change project they've had in place for a long time. They work with cooperating law firms in various locations around the country, and luckily, Milwaukee is one of the few places that they have cooperating attorneys and have had for a while. So you can go to the TILDIF website and apply. They sometimes have a wait list. I don't know if they have a wait list right now or not. But what will happen eventually is that you'll get directed to an attorney in Milwaukee, and they will provide free assistance to do a name change and to represent you and provide legal representation for that process. So that's a great program as well. There are a few other sources of financial support. Trans Lifeline is a national organization, and they have financial resources available to help with name changes. Outreach in Madison has its Wilma's Fund, which can provide financial supports for trans and non-binary folks. The Milwaukee LGBT Community Center has had a program in place, and I think it's still in place. You'll need to check with them. But they've had a program in place where they're able to assist with and provide some financial assistance for name changes as well. A couple of other places to get help is actually in a courthouse itself. If you need help when you get down to the courthouse in figuring out how to fill out a form, where to take the form and where to file it, there's an office, at least in Milwaukee County in the courthouse, called the Milwaukee Justice Center. And they have staff in there when the courts are open, which they aren't right now. But when the courts are open, that office is staffed with folks who can give you help. And all of the county courts have what they call self-help centers, where there are forms and instructions, and sometimes there are even lawyers or volunteer lawyers who are there who can help you fill out forms. So lots of resources are available to us. So how do we start this process? How do we know which ID to change first? How do we know what the effect is going to be if we change an ID? If we change one ID, do we have to change all of our IDs? There are lots and lots and lots of individual considerations. As I said earlier, we all have to make decisions for ourselves about what's best for us and how to approach this process. There are some considerations that we think about here at Forge and that we hear other folks share with us, and I'd like to just mention some of them today. and give a few suggestions to maybe guide our thinking in how we decide to approach this process. So first of all, one of the things I would think about, or what I think about for myself is, what is my goal in changing my identity documents? What's the purpose that I'm changing my identity documents for? Um, because if we can answer that question for ourselves, that'll go a long way in helping us figure out which ID documents to change and how to do that. So, for some of us, sometimes maybe we just want an ID card in our wallet that has our current photo, that reflects our current appearance, that reflects our authentic name, the name that we use, and that maybe more closely reflects our gender identity. Now, we know in Wisconsin we're still limited on our driver's license and state IDs to the M and the F gender marker. And there doesn't seem to be anything in the works yet to change that in Wisconsin, but I'm hopeful that we will follow the lead of other states and hopefully get there sometime soon. So, one of the important things to do is to think about, what am I trying to achieve? Do I want a card in my wallet that I can pull out that looks like me and is a little bit easier to use? Or am I ready to change everything? Do I want everything to reflect my name of use and a different gender marker? Do I just want to change my name? Do I also want to change my gender marker? So thinking about some of those questions will help us figure out what to do. Um, and there are going to be consequences, and there are going to be some ripple effects, right, from changing our identity documents. For instance, if we have a job and we're at work, and if we haven't, say, disclosed our gender identity or our status as trans or non-binary or however we identify, if we haven't made those disclosures, what happens if we decide to change our records with the Social Security Administration, for instance? It things are changing, and Social Security, at one point was sometimes contacting employers when there was a mismatch between the name or the gender that was being used attached to a particular Social Security number. For most private places of employment, Social Security isn't going to contact your employer anymore to ask them to clarify that mismatch. But it's good to know that changing your information on your Social Security record, for instance, is information that eventually could get to your employer, as one example. And again, these are things that, for your individual situation, I'm happy to talk with you about, and we can give you some individual guidance on. The other thing to be thinking about, in addition to our government issued IDs, and so those are the words that I use to talk about identity documents that are produced by the government. So things like a driver's license or a state ID, our birth certificates, passports, Social Security records and cards, military records and identification, tribal membership cards, if we have those. Those are government issued IDs, but we know there are lots of other places that keep records of our gender and our name. And one of the most obvious examples is our health insurance. Some others are places like our banks, our credit cards, loans that we might have, title on a car, loans on a car, mortgages on houses, rental agreements or documents with our landlords. Those are some other documents that we need to think about as well. So, Some of the other considerations, and one of the biggest considerations, if we're thinking about changing our gender marker in particular, is whether we meet the medical requirements that are imposed by law. And we'll start talking about that in just a moment. A couple other issues we might want to think about is, do I need a lawyer to help me with this process? And I think that's an answer that is, again, going to be really individual. Some people may want some assistance with this process, either from a non-lawyer advocate or from somebody who is a lawyer and who will go into court with them and represent them. Uh, Technically speaking, legally speaking, there's no requirement that you have a lawyer help you with this process. And so it's really a function of how you can best do this for yourself. And that's going to kind of answer the question about whether you seek legal support, maybe through some of the programs I mentioned earlier, or whether you proceed on your own, or whether you call somebody like me and get some advice about how to do things. Maybe you just want somebody to go to court with you. And that's something that we can do here at Forge as well. We can go down to the courthouse and help you file documents. We can go to your hearing with you if that's something you'd like some support with. Finally, sometimes people ask whether there are any limitations on who can change their name or their gender marker. For the most part, any of us, anybody in the country, can change their name at just about any time they want, with some really small exceptions. And those exceptions tend to be things that, probably aren't going to affect most of us. There are limitations on using words that are considered profane as your name. So basically, like swear words are often not allowed to be taken as a legal name. The only other real limitation can be on folks who have been convicted of crimes. So if you are currently on probation or parole, you may not be allowed to change your name. Once you are off probation or parole, so you've served a sentence if you had any, and you've completed your probation or parole period, which sometimes we talk about as being off paper. Once you're off paper, you should be able to change your name as long as you're not doing it for a purpose of kind of trying to get away from or hide or your identity and your past for bad purposes, essentially. So once we're off paper, even if we have some kind of conviction, we can change our names. The only real limitation for folks who have been convicted of crimes is folks who are registered sex offenders. In the state of Wisconsin, if you are a registered sex offender, you will likely not be allowed to change your name. And again, the policy, the reason for that the state would give is that as a registered sex offender, your location is being monitored. And so the state would say that they need to know where to find you and they need to be able to identify you. And so they're not going to let somebody change their name who's on the registry. But other than that, there aren't really any limitations. So how do we do this? How do we change our names? How do we change our gender markers? A lot of us know that there are court procedures. And that begs the question, well, okay, when do I have to go to court? And when can I just go into an agency and say, hey, give me some forms. I want to make some changes to my record. To change our name, we're generally going to need a court order. Okay, so if we want to change our name on things like our driver's license, social security, passport, and birth certificate, we're going to need a court order to do that. And those are probably the four kind of IDs I'm going to talk about most today. Our birth certificate, our driver's license from the state of Wisconsin, and then our social security record, which almost all of us will have. And then if we have a passport, that's another kind of common one. We can talk about that as well. So to change our name on any of those documents, we are going to have to get a court order. Now, to change our gender marker, how do we do that? There are a couple different ways to do that. We will need an order from a court if we want to change our birth certificate. And right now, I'm going to talk primarily about those of us who are born in Wisconsin and live in Wisconsin. So we're living in the state that we were born in. For those who either live in a different state and were born in Wisconsin, or live in Wisconsin and were born in a different state, there's going to be some different considerations. And, again, we can help you with those if you want to give us a call or send an email, and we can talk you through the process of doing this across state lines. So for gender markers, birth certificates, we will have to go to court and get a court order to change a birth certificate or have a new birth certificate issued with a different gender marker. For the other kinds of government IDs we're talking about, driver's license, state IDs, passports, social security, we are able to make changes to our gender markers by just going directly to those agencies with the appropriate paperwork and with supporting documentation from a healthcare provider. And we'll talk about that as well. Now, there are some different aspects to getting a court-ordered name or gender marker change. We're going to have to file paperwork at the court. We're going to have to pay some fees. And if we're changing our name, the court is going to require that we make a public notice of that. Okay, so that we notify the public that we want to change our name. And that is generally done by putting just a very formal, very short couple line, essentially advertisement or notice that show up in the back of newspapers for those of us who are old enough or work in professions where we still read hard copy newspapers. We may recall seeing just a big wall of legal notices at the end of the newspaper. That's the place where our name change needs to be advertised in some specified publications in Wisconsin. And the reason I'm telling you all this is just to make really clear, this does not appear in the middle of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. It doesn't appear, in the middle of your cities or newspaper. It's going to appear at the end in this very specific place with a lot of dense information about legal notices. Now, that publication requirement is something that can be waived, meaning that there are exceptions to it. A lot of people have a lot of privacy concerns about putting their name in the paper, and that can be for a whole bunch of reasons. I mean, we might just feel like, hey, that's my personal business. Why do people need to know that? We may be worried about being outed in places that we don't want to be outed. And some people might have really specific concerns about certain people seeing that information or being able to find them or locate them. When we have some specific concerns about our privacy, there is a procedure called proceeding under seal in court. And what that means is that you get out of having to do that public notification in the newspaper about your name change petition. Now, there's a lot of talk about this in our communities. A lot of people sometimes make those applications and they don't get granted. Okay, so that, a judge can say, hey, I just kind of think that you haven't given me a good enough reason for you to proceed confidentially. Unfortunately, in this country, our legal proceedings, for the most part, they're public. Um, if you have some concerns about proceeding confidentially, if you want some help with that, let us know. What I will say generally is that in the state of Wisconsin, um, you can try to say, look, I am a transgender person, I'm a non-binary person, or however you identify, and I am concerned about things like my privacy, about potential discrimination, about other kind of stigma, about emotional or physical violence if somebody finds out that I'm trans. And by changing my name, I think I'm flagging that I might be trans. I definitely will encourage you to put that in your applications. That may or may not be enough depending on what county you live in. The more progressive counties tend to have judges that are a little more progressive and are more willing to hear and understand what we're asking for. If you have some really specific circumstances in your own life that mean that you have some concerns about your safety, I would really encourage you to put that in the application, because that's what will hopefully kind of push it over the goal line. If you can say, I've got some individual, really specific concerns about my safety. So a judge could deny that application to proceed under seal. It doesn't mean that your name change or your gender marker request has been denied. You can still proceed without that confidentiality if you're comfortable doing that. If you get to a point where you're doing this by yourself and that application for confidentiality gets denied, feel free to reach out for some help at that point and get some advice about whether it makes sense to go forward, or whether it makes sense to withdraw the application and maybe try again. We can talk folks through those issues. The other part of going to court and getting a court-ordered name change is attending a hearing. And again, that's one of those things that can be kind of intimidating sounding. What that really means is that you will go and you will talk to a judge, and the judge will ask a few really basic questions, and you'll tell them, hey, I just want to change my name. This name aligns better with my identity. We don't have to give really specific reasons about who we are, about our medical situation, nothing to change our name. You can just say, this is the name I want. It identifies me better. And that's enough. And the judge should not be asking personal questions or doing anything that feels stigmatizing about your identity or your gender identity. And so, if that stuff happens, if you have friends that stuff has happened to, let us know, and we'll give you some help with that. Now, as I said, we are not likely going to talk a lot about the procedures for changing our name and our gender with all the various agencies that keep our documents, because we just don't have time to do that today. But what I do want to talk about, because this is something that a lot of us think about, is what about my gender marker? Where can I change my gender marker? What agencies can I do that with, and how can I do it? Do I need to have had some kind of surgery? Do I need to be on hormones? Can I change my name or my gender marker without any of those things? The answers to those vary quite a bit. A lot of us probably know that in Wisconsin, we have a little bit of a limitation in our law that's really unfortunate, and that, again, is something that hopefully will get changed through advocacy at the state level. And that is that the statute, the law that talks about when we can change our gender on our birth certificate requires, it uses the language that we have to have had a surgical procedure. That seems like pretty clear language, requiring surgery. So that's definitely something that can create a barrier for a lot of us who haven't had surgical interventions or don't want surgical interventions or maybe can't access surgical interventions for lots of reasons. And that's something that, it's there, and it's the law right now. I will say that in, again, some of the more progressive counties in Wisconsin, like Milwaukee County, Dane County in particular, where Madison is, those judges tend to interpret this requirement more broadly. And there have been cases in which somebody comes with a letter from a doctor that says that they've had appropriate treatment, and that can sometimes be considered enough to change a gender marker. So if you really want to change your gender marker on your birth certificate, give us a call and we can talk about whether that could be a possibility, even if we haven't, we're not meeting this legal requirement of surgical procedure. For most of our other documents and our identity documents, there is no requirement that we have had surgery, okay? So we can change our gender marker on a lot of our IDs, and but maybe not be able to change it on our birth certificate. And for a lot of us, that's functionally, that's going to be great. That's going to be enough on a day-to-day basis for us to go out and be able to present our documents in a way that align with our gender identity. How often do we rely on our birth certificates? Not that often, right? We're more often using things like our social security number, or our driver's license, sometimes a passport, as our identity documents, our key identity documents. Now, in order to change a lot of those identity documents, what we really need is a statement from a healthcare provider, okay? And sometimes that can be a mental health provider. Sometimes it may need to be a medical provider, but mental health providers can help with this stuff too. And there's different requirements. Sometimes those documents may need to be notarized. They might need to have kind of certain technical language in them to make it more likely that they're accepted. These things are talked about in Forge's Trans in Wisconsin guide that we referenced earlier, and they're also talked about in Trans Legal Help Wisconsin's written guide that we talked about earlier. And those are probably the two places I would send you for accurate and up-to-date information about doing gender changes in particular. A lot of us have probably done Google searches looking for this information in Wisconsin, and there's a lot of outdated information out there, and things have changed in the last few years. So if you want good up-to-date information, check out Forge and Trans Legal Help Wisconsin's website. So as I said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about specific agencies. If you have questions and want to put those in the chat box, we can try to get to those. One thing that I do want to talk about, because we have a lot of folks on the call and a lot of folks who will watch this later on YouTube who live in Milwaukee, I want to talk about a very cool program, I think, that the city of Milwaukee has. Now, unfortunately, this program is only available to people who are residents of the city of Milwaukee. If we are in other cities in the county of Milwaukee, we unfortunately can't use this program. But the city of Milwaukee offers something called a municipal ID or a city ID. Lots of us don't know that this exists. They haven't done a good job advertising it. We talk about it every chance we get because it is just, it's a really great program. The city has an ID card that we can get, and we can get it pretty darn easily and at low cost, okay? All we have to do is go down to City Hall and fill out a pretty short application in the licensing department. There's a $10 fee for this ID card. Forge is more than happy to help you pay for this card. And part of the reason we like this program so much is because what it at least does is it pretty easily puts a card, you know, in our wallet, in our pocket, in our purse, in our backpack, whatever, that will have a current photo where we can put on that card our name of use, okay? And where we've got more gender marker options. We've got 4 gender marker options. The gender markers that are available are M, F. There is a non-binary marker available. And then there's a 4th marker that's just kind of a catch-all. And I think what they call it is other or non-disclosed. So I've decided not to disclose my gender. So that's what I chose for my card. So my card has a hyphen on it, just a dash, just a little straight line. And the fact that it's not an M or an F makes me really happy. I also love that it's got a current picture of me on it. And, you know, there is no mismatch then in other people's minds when they look at my photo and they look at my gender marker. So these IDs can be a super great way to get an identification card fast and pretty cheaply. And with financial assistance from Forge, you could get it at no cost whatsoever. The benefits of these cards, there's quite a few. First of all, if you get one of these cards, it's not going to have any ripple effects on any of your other IDs. Okay, it's not going to create any kind of mismatch in government databases or systems. It's not something your employer is ever going to know about. The only people who are ever going to know about it are the people that you chose, that you choose to show it to. Okay. One of the other excellent benefits of this card, especially for trans and non-binary and other folks who, again, you know, have got mismatches on their IDs, the Milwaukee Police Department is required. And let me repeat that. The Milwaukee Police Department is required to accept the Milwaukee ID as your official government ID when you are stopped on the street and they say, "Show me your ID card, please." You don't have to show them your state driver's license or your state ID card, even if you're carrying one. So I, for instance, carry both in my wallet. I've got my driver's license and I carry my Milwaukee ID. A lot of times I carry my Milwaukee ID on top of my driver's license. And that's just because it makes me feel a little bit better that if I have to open my wallet in front of a police officer, I can do that. And what's going to be sitting there in the little plastic window is my Milwaukee ID with my / gender marker and my current picture and the name that I use. And they have to take that as your government ID. It can also be helpful in lots of other places, private establishments like pharmacies. If you have to go into a school, if you have to go into the Milwaukee Public Schools, say, to pick up your kid, or a kid that you care for, a lot of times they want IDs. You can use your Milwaukee ID in those situations. A lot of people ask whether the sheriff's department has to honor that ID. And the sheriff's department is not required to honor that ID. The sheriff's department is an entity of the county, and they have not, said that they will. They have not publicly made a statement that they will accept that ID. I would certainly recommend trying to use it, and say, look, here's my government ID from the city of Milwaukee. Definitely would recommend that. Couple of other things that are cool about this: for $10, the ID is good for 5 years. The other thing that's really great about it is that it's a super easy way for children who have supportive parents or guardians. I will say that, but it's a super easy way for young people to get new ID. And to get an accurate ID. So these IDs are available to anybody 14 and older. Because one of the challenges for our young trans and non-binary folks can be, how do they identify themselves? They might not be old enough to have a driver's license yet. They might get a driver's license that doesn't reflect their identity. They might have a school ID that doesn't reflect their identity. So people 14 and above with a signature of their parent or guardian can also get these IDs. And we've helped people get these IDs and use them, and then take them back to their school. A school that is not doing such a great job acknowledging their identity, that's not willing to use their name or recognize their gender. Sometimes getting the Milwaukee ID can be really helpful, because now I can go to the principal of my school and I can say, look, dude, the city of Milwaukee is a government entity. I have an official government ID that recognizes my name and gender, and you need to do the same thing for me. So there are lots of really cool ways to use that card, and we really recommend that people get it. And you know what? Thank you, Michael. I see in the chat box that I used a word that some people often think is gendered, and so if I probably shouldn't have done that, and so I apologize for that. I do use it in a gender neutral way. Thank you. So I think at that point, I'm going to stop talking. I know that we've had a couple of questions in the chat box, and we can take a look at those questions and see if they're ones we can answer right now, or we can talk about them later. And I again want to acknowledge the commentary in the chat box, and I appreciate that word is not one that people use in a gender neutral way, and I'm sorry for that.
And I didn't mean to call you out, but I do know that some folks really are very sensitive to that, and I think we all need to be sensitive to that as well. So,
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael.
yeah, like I said, I wasn't trying to call you out, but I get that. Why don't we go back to the first question that was asked? Why don't we just go in sequential order? And so the first question was, given last night's news, and I'm not sure necessarily what that is, but I'm guessing, and the fact that Minnesota has protections that Wisconsin does not, I may be considering trying to get a Minnesota ID. Is there a process for changing name as a resident of another state and having my Wisconsin birth certificate updated? Complicated question. Many things in there.
Yes. Yeah. So I can partially answer this question right now. And then I think, as the person said, this might be a good follow-up question for a one-on-one conversation. So is there a process to change your ID, or excuse me, your birth certificate if you live in another state? Let me start over. So you're living in Wisconsin and you'd be establishing Minnesota residency. And there could be some challenges in doing that, I'll just say as an aside, but we don't need to talk about that right now. But yes, if you are a resident of another state, you're living in Wisconsin, the real question is going to be, where were you born? Okay, because the state that you were born in and the county that you were born in has to be involved in changing the actual birth certificate document. The court that you would go to do that is going to be the court where you live. Okay, so there could be this could be crossing state lines. Maybe it wouldn't cross state lines. I would say, why don't you give me a call and we'll talk about this. But yeah, if our birth certificate is from a different state than where we live, we can still change it. We just have to do something in each of those states, the state of residency and the state that we were born in.
So the next question is related to, does there need to be a surgical procedure to change your birth certificate or some of those other documents? And could it be an unrelated surgery to gender? And I wanted to maybe add to that question. I think it's a great question. And, in addition to that, we know that we've heard folks ask about, does an orchiectomy count? Does a hysterectomy count? What about youth who are not eligible medically to have surgery? Can they change their gender marker? So added to that question are those caveats too.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And what I'm wanting to do, if I can do it quickly, is to find on my screen the actual language of our statute. Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I have to say that I think that it's probably clear that the intent of the law is that there has been a surgery that is gender affirming in some regard. I believe that if we have had any surgery that is gender affirming, and we have a medical provider who will say that in writing, then we should be able to change the gender marker on our birth certificate through a court order. What is key here is having a medical provider who is willing to use the correct language in a letter that they write for you. So part of this process, as we all know, can be finding a medical provider who's going to work with us in an appropriate way and help support these changes that we want to make. So I'm not going to say that any particular surgery is or is not going to fulfill the legal requirement, but any gender affirming surgery should fulfill that requirement. For folks who can't access surgical procedures, including, as Michael said, minor children in the eyes of the law, people who are under 18, people for whom the medical profession says, hey, you're a little bit too young at this point for surgical procedures. They may not be able to change their gender marker on their birth certificate. They may have to wait to do that. They may be able to change their gender marker in other places, though, like I discussed earlier, like their social security record or their passport, or if they're 16 and they have a state driver's license, they may be able to do those things directly with those agencies, okay? And again, we do that with documentation from a doctor. We don't need the court order. So the only time we have that weird surgical requirement is when we're going for a court-ordered gender marker change on our birth certificate.
And Shelley, I'd just like to add there too that there's some really good examples of language that our providers can use, both at the NCTE website, and I think it's in the Trans in Wisconsin guide as well, of using a provider needs to use language like irreversible changes related to gender identity, and there's just some really simple catchphrases, and that's what those places are looking for. That's what passport agencies are looking for, are those catchwords, which I know is different than the birth certificate.
Yep, that's exactly right, Michael. And we've got so that language is available. There's example letters that you can print out or show on your phone to your medical provider when you're in an appointment and asking them for a letter. Again, the 3 written resource places that have all of that stuff is Forge's Trans in Wisconsin Guide, uh, uh, Translegal Help Wisconsin's Guide, and as Michael said, NCTE's Identity Document Center website. They've all got example language.
And I'm aware that it's 2 o'clock. And Shelley, if you're able to stay for a few minutes longer, I think we could do another question or two if folks have them. Hopefully Sarah can stay for a minute or two as well. Okay, cool. Does anybody have other questions? I know that there's a lot of information that was shared today, and it's recorded, so if you want to listen to it again, you can. But Shelley is available right now for questions if you have them. And as people are oh, there's a hand up. Let me unmute the hand. Or actually, Caleb, could you unmute the hand because you know how to do that better?
Mark, you should be able to talk now if you unmute yourself.
Okay. Did I do it right?
Yes. Hi, Marky.
Hi, Marky. The question is for the municipal IDs in the city of Milwaukee.
Mhm.
You have to bring any documentation along to prove that you are who you are or claim to be?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. Yeah, you do. You do. And those documents for most of us are going to be pretty easy to satisfy those requirements. We'll see if maybe we can put the website of the Milwaukee ID, put that page, that information page in the chat box. Yeah, you're going to have to do 2 things, kind of like when you vote. You're going to have to establish who you are, what your legal identity is. You're also going to have to establish that you're a resident of the city of Milwaukee. And we can do those things in a lot of the same ways we can do it for voting. So for the majority of people, that's going to be fairly straightforward to satisfy. So if you have a driver's license from the state of Wisconsin, if you have a passport, if you have some other identification document that identifies you legally, they do need to see that. And the other thing they need to see is that you live in Milwaukee, and you can do that if your driver's license has your correct address on it, or you can do it with things like a bank statement, or a We Energies utility bill, some of the same things we use for voting. And if you go to that website, which we just put in the chat box, it's got a list.
Okay.
Two long lists of all the different documents you can use, and you just pick which one you have that's easiest for you to use.
Okay, I just didn't want to walk in there Monday and say I needed one of these and didn't have the proper documentation. I like to go ready.
Yeah, that's a great idea. You do need to bring those documents with you. The other thing you can do on the website is you can actually print the application. It's a very short application, so you can print that and you can fill it out. If you want to use a name or a gender marker that is different from your legal name or your legal gender marker, you have to fill out an extra piece of paper, and that's called an affidavit. And so what you're going to do is you're going to say, under penalty of perjury, I'm telling the truth that, I use this name, X, and that my gender is Y, and I want those 2 pieces of information on my Milwaukee ID, even though they might be different from what's on my state ID or what my legal name and gender are right now. The affidavit I believe is also available on the website. And if it's not, or if you don't have a printer, you can get those forms and fill them out at the office. They're pretty short forms.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Great. Are there other questions before we wrap up today? I am not seeing anything yet, and I'm not seeing any hands, which is great. Why don't we close up for today, since we're already a little bit over time, and Shelley is available. I typed Shelley's contact information in the chat box. We're easy to find. Shelley's easy to find. Shelley's responsive, which is fantastic. But why don't we close out for the day, and let me share with folks a couple of things that are coming up. Let me do the schedule first, and then some other things. So what's coming up for this coming week of programming is on Tuesday is Annie Lakatos is going to talk about smoking, eating, and moving, and what we do with our bodies and how we can stay healthy. Wednesday is Cooking with Denise, and it will be fabulous and fun and adaptable to everybody's eating styles. Thursday, we're going to have a kind of an open chat about what does pride mean to you, especially in this month where we're having some differences in pride. Friday, we'll have a pride trivia game, which will be fun as well. And then on Saturday, Caleb, who's the back end, and people have seen Caleb's posts, Caleb's going to talk about staying active and outdoors in the middle of COVID. So that's the week's schedule coming up. When we close out today, you'll get an evaluation, and we really care about your opinions about today and what you'd like to see in the future. So if you could take a minute, we'd really appreciate it. Shelley, thank you for spending your sunny afternoon with us and sharing your smarts with everybody. Thank you, Sarah, for interpreting on the fly today, a quick ask. And thanks everybody for being here and spending your Saturday with us. So enjoy the rest of your weekend, and hopefully we'll see you all next week.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks everyone for being here, for your questions.